I'm Maxie of Maxie Makes. Welcome to my sewing room. Today I'd like to share a project with you, and let me show you a picture of it. This is the Alation Quilt, and you see it on the wall behind me too. It is made from my daughter's fabric line, Winged for Art Gallery Fabrics. And let me show you a little bit of that. Here is this beautiful butterfly print, which was the inspiration for the quilt, and a few of the other fabrics that we'll be working with today. Okay, the pattern is a free download from Art Gallery Fabrics website, and you'll find the link to that. You can go and print this out, and the instructions are there for you, and let's get started. First, I'd like to show you how I make half-square triangle units. The half-square triangle units in this quilt are all 2-inch finished size, so I'm going to make those from 3-inch squares. So I take 2 fabrics that I'm going to make the half-square triangle unit from, and I cut 2 3-inch squares, one from each fabric. On the lighter fabric, I want to draw a diagonal line with a pencil or a pen. Put those 2 squares together, right sides together, and now I'm just going to sew 1/4 inch on both sides. So let's put this under here, and I'd like to show you one of my favorite features on the Baby Lock machine. If I lower my presser foot down, it's not very likely that I got my presser foot in the exact position that I'd like for it to be, and instead of sit here and lift the presser foot and adjust and lift and adjust, if I push the needle down button one time, the needle drops down slightly and the feed dogs move away so that I can freely move my fabric. Do you see that? The feed dogs don't hold it, and I can adjust it exactly where I want it to be, and then I just sew. I use this feature all the time on this machine. Now I'll just rotate it around and stitch on the other side. You probably already know about this technique. There's not too many half-square triangle units that you have to make for this quilt, so there are lots of different methods, but this one works really fast and easy. So now I'm just going to slice this in half right on the line that I drew, and when I open it up, I have 2 half-square triangle units. I want to press that seam to the dark side. I'm just going to finger press it right now. And the 3-inch measurement that I gave you allowed for a fudge factor. That means this is a little too large, which is a good thing, because now I can take a 2.5-inch ruler and I can place it right on the half-square triangle unit and trim it on all 4 sides, and it's going to be absolutely perfect. If you don't allow a fudge factor, sometimes your seam allowance can be a little off, and then your half-square triangle unit will be a little small, too small for you to use. So I'm just, taking a tiny bit off of the edge on all 4 sides, but now that one is perfect and it's ready to go in the quilt. So let's talk about how we put this together. This whole quilt is constructed on a fusible gridded interfacing. This is a brand by Bossel, and I really like it. It's my favorite because it's so billowy and light, and it doesn't add stiffness to your quilt. So that's the brand that I recommend. And what you want to do is spread your interfacing out on your ironing board. The pattern tells you the size to cut the pieces, but I'll tell you now that you need 4 that are 15 by 18 squares. You just cut that, and it fits on your ironing board, and it doesn't even touch the floor, so it won't get dirty, so it just works perfectly. Now, first of all, you need to print out this picture of the butterfly quilt, and it has the grids marked on it. And then I just fold this into quadrants, and I like to number the lines with a pencil. And I have all my squares organized right here in a bin close to me, and I just begin to lay the row out according to the graph. It's kind of like putting a puzzle together. It's so much fun, and this would actually be a great project for children to do. If you have children or grandchildren, you could cut the squares for them and they could lay them out and you could fuse them in place. It just is so fun. It goes together. You see the butterfly come to life and you just lay them out right within the square that's drawn. You're going to have a little bit of a space on the outer edge of each square, and that's intentional. The grid is just a tiny bit bigger than 2.5 inches, but that allows you to fold it and make your seams, and you'll see that in just a few moments when we begin to sew this. You'll understand that a little better. So you just put those in place and iron them with a hot iron. I like to go ahead and lay out about 4 rows at a time. And then advance the fusible over the edge of the ironing board like this. Let it hang down and then lay out more until you have filled up this piece. And one other tip I'd like to tell you is that I covered my ironing board with something light. I just covered it with a muslin type fabric, but that allows me to see the grid on the interfacing, because that's very important that you know where to lay your square. So let me show you what a finished quadrant will look like after you have all the pieces fused in place. This is 1/4 of the quilt, the upper left butterfly wing, and all of it is fused onto the grid and ready to sew. To sew this, you simply are going to fold the first row together, right sides together, and it automatically folds right where it needs to for your seam. And now I'm going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance right here. Now let me show you how I like to package this. I just like to fold this. Just makes it a little easier to get it under the machine. And it does not matter if you sew the vertical or the horizontal seams first. That really doesn't matter. Do them all the same. I would recommend that because you're going to sew these together, and then that will help ensure that your seam allowances are all working in the right direction. So let's line that up and sew. To secure my seam at the beginning and the end. It's going to be handled a lot, and it'll just help it to hold throughout the whole process. Then if you open that out, you see this nice seam. We still have our spaces here. We're not worrying about those right now. We're only sewing these, so you would just fold it over one more time. And now you're ready to sew the second. So you're just going to continue doing that until you have all of the seams sewn in one direction for this section. I have the second quadrant finished with the seams sewn in one direction. Let me show you what that looks like. Looks kind of long and skinny right now just because the seams are only sewn one way. Now it's time to sew the opposite seams. Let me show you how the back looks. This has all of the seams sewn in this direction. Now it's important to not press these seams yet. I know you want to because it doesn't look flat, but we need it to be like this right now. The next step is that you must clip each little intersection on your seam where the dashed line is to the stitches. So it's real simple. You just take your scissors and clip to the seam. And clip right on the dashed line. If your fabric edge isn't exactly lined up with the dashed line, just ignore your fabric edge and just make sure you're clipping on that blue dashed line that's printed on this interfacing. And it's okay if you clip to the threads or even slightly past the seam that you stitched. You don't have to stop right at it. In fact, I like to just clip the threads in the seam. And what that allows is for folding the quilt. Let me turn the top over again. All right. What that allows you to do now is to be able to fold this row over. Without clipping, it just won't fold over. So now we're ready to sew this. We're going to turn the piece this way, and again, I'm going to package it a little bit so that it's more manageable. It's important that you make these two seam allowances. Can you see those that are opposite of each other, one on the top here and one on the bottom? It's important when you sew to move those in opposite directions. Can you see that? Doesn't matter which way you go, just make sure they're opposite. All right? So I'm going to begin with the seam allowance pointing away from me. All right, I'm going to sew. And I love this stylus by Clover. It's my favorite tool. I have a couple of them in my sewing room, and I usually keep one in my hand at all times when I'm sewing. This helps me to hold that seam allowance down as I'm approaching the presser foot. And you want to just make sure that the one on the underneath side doesn't get flipped in the wrong direction. And this stylus just helps because you can kind of sweep right under it and just control the direction that the seam allowance is going, and it doesn't flip in a direction that I don't want it to lay. Okay. Again, this is more brainless work. This quilt is so easy to make. And when you're finished, the seams, where the seams intersect, it's perfect because of the gridded fusible. You can't not have a perfect seam when you make a quilt on this material. Okay? So now we're at the end of the first row. I'm going to secure that and take it out. Now here's what you get. It's beginning to look a little more finished now when you get this part sewn. Still, we don't want to iron this yet, so we're going to flip this over. We can stay right at the machine and just flip and sew and flip and sew. The other thing I want to tell you before we go any further is that make sure these seams are pointing away from me and these are pointing toward me or laying toward me. So now I want that underneath seam to point away from me. In other words, the seam allowances in each row needs to go in opposite directions. That's going to let it lay a lot flatter. If you had all the seam allowances going in the same direction, you would have too much thickness right there at the intersection. We don't want that. It would be hard to quilt through, and it might look a little thicker there, and this just lets it lay nice and flat. Okay? So you're going to continue to sew all of the seams across in this section in the same way until you have them all sewn. There's one that wanted to go the wrong way. Use my stylus and straighten it out. There's the second seam sewn. It goes pretty fast actually. Doesn't take much time at all. Now do you see how nice those squares are? And when we do press this, you're going to see that the seam allowances are, the seam lines exactly line up, and everything looks great. Okay, now I'd like to show you the finished quadrant. This is one that is not sewn, it's just fused. And you remember we have these open places between each of the squares, and that's nothing to worry about because that is there so that you can flip it, sew it, and have your seam allowance. So underneath is a finished piece, and you see how much smaller it is because the seam allowances take in all of that excess, 1/4 of an inch on each side of each square. But isn't that pretty? Look how perfect all the seams are in there. You can see the half square triangles and the squares. Let me show you the back side because this one has been stitched and pressed. After you have stitched both the vertical and the horizontal seams, that's when you take it to the ironing board and you press. And because you sewed them in alternate directions, it's very easy to press them. And you do want the solid seam to all go in one direction. And now this piece would be ready to sew to the other quadrant. I would sew this seam to the other quadrant. This is the upper part of the butterfly. Well, let me show you on this back here. This seam just to the center, and then sew this seam just to the center, and then sew the seam across the middle of the butterfly. And you're finished. If you would be interested in a kit for the quilt, I have those on my website in both colorways, the Northern Migration and the Southern Migration. Those are available there, and they include all the fabrics you need for the top and the binding, as well as the gridded interfacing for the quilt. Thanks, and have a great day. I'm so glad you joined us, and God bless.